The needle slipped from Dr. Mansouri's hand, clattering against the metal tray like a bell tolling my death sentence. "Stage 4, he said, and the words hit my chest like stones. Metastatic. 18 months, possibly less. I stared at the ultrasound screen, where dark shadows bloomed across my abdomen, like poisonous flowers. Cancer. Everywhere. Eating me alive from the inside, while I'd been planning wedding venues and arguing with Samir about our future children's names. "Miss Qasemi," Dr. Mansouri's voice seemed to come from underwater. "Do you understand what I'm telling you?" I nodded, because speaking would make it real. The fluorescent lights above buzzed like angry wasps. Outside, Jerusalem's church bells echoed off ancient stones, but God felt as distant as the moon. My phone vibrated against my purse. Samir's name flashed on the screen. "Dinner tonight? I have something important to ask you." The engagement ring. I'd seen him researching diamonds, making nervous phone calls to my father. Tonight was supposed to be the beginning of everything. Instead, it was the end. "I need to try something," I whispered, my voice cracking like old parchment. "Chemotherapy, surgery, anything." Dr. Mansouri's expression softened with the practiced compassion of a man who delivered death sentences for a living. "Of course, we'll start immediately. But Esther," he leaned forward, "you need to tell your family, your boyfriend. You can't fight this alone." But I was already planning exactly that. Because telling them meant watching hope die in their eyes. It meant becoming a burden instead of a blessing. It meant admitting that all my prayers, all my faithful church attendance, all my careful Christian witness hadn't protected me from this. I stumbled out of the clinic into Jerusalem's blazing sun, my legs threatening to buckle beneath me. The ancient stones of the old city stretched before me, walls that had witnessed Christ's own suffering. Now they would witness mine. I pressed my back against the warm limestone, closed my eyes, and tried to breathe. But each breath felt stolen, borrowed time I hadn't earned. My phone rang again. "Samir." I let it ring. 3 months earlier, I'd stood in the same courtyard outside the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, leading a missions team with such righteous satisfaction. The spring sun painted everything golden, and I felt untouchable, blessed by God for my faithful service. "Esther, you're a natural leader," Pastor Michael had said as we distributed food to struggling families. "The way you organize these outreaches, your heart for the lost, God is really using you." I'd basked in his approval, in the approving nods of the church board, in the way visiting missionaries sought my advice about ministry in Jerusalem. I was the model Christian woman, bilingual, culturally connected, passionate about reaching both Jews and Arabs with the gospel. That was before I knew cancer was already spreading through my body like wildfire. That was before I understood that all my works, all my ministry success, all my careful reputation meant nothing when faced with my own mortality. Now, sitting in my car outside the clinic, I gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles went white. How could God let this happen? I'd given him everything, my time, my energy, my complete devotion. I'd turned down job opportunities to serve the church full-time. I'd remained pure for marriage while other women my age were living freely. I'd honored my parents, served my community, shared my faith boldly. Where was his protection now? My phone buzzed with a text from my mother. "How did the appointment go? Call me." Then another from my sister Miriam, praying for good news. And finally, Samir again. "Habibti, you're worrying me. Please call." Samir. My beautiful, successful, completely secular boyfriend who thought my faith was charming but irrelevant, who made jokes about my imaginary friend in the sky and rolled his eyes when I said grace before meals. The man who was planning to propose tonight to a woman who might not live to see their first anniversary. I could see him cataloging my weight loss, my pallor, the way I'd been avoiding his touch. He was too intelligent not to put the pieces together eventually. There are some complications, I said carefully. Things that might change our timeline. What timeline? Our timeline. His voice had taken on an edge I'd never heard before. I looked up to see something like fear flickering in his eyes. Samir, I think we need to take a step back. From us. From planning a future together. The words came out in a rush, and I immediately regretted them. His face went through a series of expressions. Confusion, hurt, anger. Are you breaking up with me? He asked quietly. I'm trying to protect you. From what? From watching me die, I thought. From tying your life to someone who might not make it to Christmas. From the pain of loving someone who's already halfway to the grave. From making a mistake, I said instead. He stared at me for a long moment, then laughed. A bitter sound that held no humor. This is about your faith, isn't it? Your family's been pressuring you to find a good Christian man. And you're finally listening. If only it were that simple. This isn't about faith, I said. Though that was partly a lie. My diagnosis was forcing me to confront just how unequally yoked we really were. Isn't it? You've been pulling away ever since your cousin's wedding last month. Ever since that conversation with your mother about marriage and spiritual compatibility. He made air quotes around the words, his tone mocking. This has nothing to do with my mother. Doesn't it? Face it, Esther. You're a good Arab Christian girl who thought she could have a little rebellion. But when it comes time to get serious, you're choosing religion over love. His words stung because they held just enough truth to cut deep. I had been rebellious, dating him despite my family's concerns. I had told myself I could change him, could love him into faith. Now facing eternity, I was finally seeing clearly. Maybe you're right, I said quietly. Maybe I am choosing faith over love. Then you're a coward, he said, standing abruptly. And I thought you were braver than that. After he left, I sat in my empty apartment and tried to convince myself I'd done the right thing. But all I felt was empty. I'd lost the man I loved and gained nothing but the cold comfort of theological correctness. I opened my Bible again, this time to the Psalms, looking for David's honesty about despair. Why are you downcast, O my soul? I read. Why so disturbed within me? The question echoed in my heart, but David's answer, put your hope in God, felt impossible. Where was hope when everything I'd counted on was crumbling? The chemotherapy began the following week, and with it, a new education in humiliation. I sat in the cancer center watching poison drip into my veins while around me, other patients fought their own battles with varying degrees of grace. My first infusion nurse was a cheerful woman named Ruth who chattered constantly about her grandchildren and the weather. I nodded politely while internally screaming at the unfairness of it all. She got to go home to family dinners and birthday parties. I got to go home to an empty apartment and an uncertain future. First time? She asked, as she adjusted my IV. I nodded, not trusting my voice. It's tough, I won't lie, but I've seen people beat odds that would make your head spin. You just have to keep fighting. Fighting. The word felt foreign. I'd spent my whole life trying to be good, trying to earn God's favor through service and obedience. Fighting seemed too aggressive, too presumptuous. Who was I to demand healing from God? The side effects hit within days. First the nausea, then the bone-deep fatigue that made climbing stairs feel like scaling mountains. My beautiful thick hair began falling out in clumps that clogged my shower drain. I avoided mirrors, afraid to see what I was becoming. Is that why Samir called me last night, asking if you seemed upset about something? My hands stilled on the coffee pot. He called you. He's worried sick. Says you've been acting strange for weeks, that you won't talk to him. Miriam moved closer, studying my face. Esther, what aren't you telling us? Before I could answer, my phone rang. Pastor Michael's name appeared on the screen, and I felt a stab of panic. Had someone from the hospital called the church? Did he know? I should take this, I said, answering quickly. Pastor Michael, good morning. Esther, praise God. I have wonderful news. The missions board approved your application for the outreach coordinator position, full-time ministry, leading our evangelism efforts in the West Bank. It's exactly what you've been praying for. The job, the position I dreamed of for 3 years, the opportunity to serve God full-time, to make a real difference in reaching the lost. It was everything I'd wanted, offered to me 18 months too late. That's wonderful, I managed. You don't sound very excited. This is a huge opportunity, Esther. A chance to really impact the kingdom. We need you to start next month. Next month? By then, I'd be deep into chemotherapy, if I was lucky. If I was unlucky, I'd be dead. Can I have some time to pray about it? I asked. The silence on the other end was telling. Of course, but... Esther, this is what you've been working toward. Is there something else you're considering? I just need to be sure it's God's timing, I said, hating how spiritual I sounded when I felt anything but. After we hung up, Miriam was staring at me with narrowed eyes. You're turning down your dream job? Esther, what is happening to you? I'm not turning it down, I'm just praying about timing. Since when do you pray about serving God? You've been talking about this position for years. She was right, of course. The old Esther would have accepted immediately, would have seen it as confirmation of God's blessing on her life. But the old Esther didn't know she was dying. How could I take a position that required long-term commitment when I didn't have a long-term? How could I lead others in faith when my own faith felt as fragile as spun glass? Maybe God is redirecting my path, I said weakly. Miriam's expression shifted from confusion to alarm. Esther, you're scaring me. This isn't like you at all. First, you're secretive about the doctor. Now you're hesitating about ministry. What's really going on? I opened my mouth to tell her the truth, but the words stuck in my throat. How could I explain that I was questioning everything I'd built my life on? That facing death was making me realize how much of my faith had been performance rather than relationship? I just need some time to think, I said finally. After Miriam left, I sat in my quiet apartment and tried to pray. But every word felt hollow. Every petition seemed to bounce off the ceiling. Where was the God I'd served so faithfully? Where was the peace he'd promised his children? That evening, Samir arrived with takeout and determination. One look at his face told me he wasn't accepting any more deflections. We're going to talk, he said, setting the food on my counter. Really talk. No more of this I need space nonsense. I watched him move around my kitchen with the familiarity of 8 months together, and my heart broke a little more. He was so alive, so vital, so completely unaware that death was sitting at my table. The medical thing, he said, without preamble, as we sat down to eat. How serious is it really? I picked at my food, buying time I didn't have. Serious enough that I need to reconsider some things. What kind of things? My priorities, my future, what's really important? He set down his fork, his architect's mind immediately analyzing the structural changes in our conversation. Esther, you're talking like someone who's given up. What did they find? The question hung between us like a bridge I wasn't ready to cross. I'd been so sure I could change him, so convinced that my godly example would eventually soften his heart toward Christ. I'd compromised my convictions piece by piece, telling myself it was evangelism when really it was just loneliness. Now, facing eternity, I realized how foolish I'd been. How could I have spent 8 months yoked to an unbeliever? How could I have been so blind to the spiritual danger I'd put myself in? I drove home through narrow streets, passing the places where Jesus had walked, had suffered, had died. The irony wasn't lost on me. I was living in the city where Christ conquered death, and I was dying. My apartment in the Christian Quarter felt like a museum of wasted opportunities. The walls were covered with photos from mission trips, volunteer work, church events, evidence of a life spent serving others while apparently missing God's heart entirely. I sank onto my couch and opened my Bible, not to find comfort, but to find answers. Why wasn't he healing me? Why wasn't my faithfulness enough? The pages fell open to Job, and I nearly laughed at the bitter irony. Though he slay me, yet will I trust him. Easy words for someone who wasn't actually being slain. My phone rang. Samir again. This time, I answered. Habibti, where are you? I've been calling for hours. I'm home. I'm processing some news. What kind of news? You sound terrible. How could I tell him? This man who thought death was just the end, who had no concept of eternity, who would see my diagnosis as proof that faith was meaningless. The tests came back. It's more serious than we thought. Serious how? I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of the lie I was about to tell. They need to run more tests. I might need surgery. It wasn't technically a lie, but it wasn't the truth either. I couldn't bear to see his pity, his relief that he'd found out before proposing, his inevitable withdrawal from a relationship that now came with an expiration date. I'm coming over, he said immediately. No, I need time to process this alone. Esther, whatever this is, we face it together. That's what couples do. But we weren't really a couple, were we? We were two people ignoring the fundamental incompatibility of our souls. How could we face eternal questions together when he didn't believe in eternity? Samir, I need space tonight, please. After we hung up, I sat in my living room surrounded by the artifacts of my Christian life and felt more alone than I'd ever felt. Where was the peace that passeth understanding? Where was the joy of salvation? Where was the God who promised never to leave or forsake me? That night, I did something else I'd never done. I screamed at God. I've done everything right. I shouted at my ceiling, not caring if the neighbors heard. I've served you faithfully. I've sacrificed everything for your kingdom, and this is what I get. The silence that followed was deafening. I fell asleep on my couch, still wearing my clothes from the doctor's appointment, clutching my Bible like a life preserver that wasn't quite keeping me afloat. The next morning brought Miriam to my doorstep with fresh bread and worried eyes. My younger sister had always been the intuitive one, able to read my moods like scripture. You look terrible, she said, without preamble, pushing past me into the apartment. What did the doctor really say yesterday? I told you. More tests. Esther. She turned to face me, her expression stern. I've known you for 28 years. I know when you're lying. What's going on? The question hung between us like a sword. I wanted to collapse into her arms, to let someone else carry this burden for a moment. But Miriam was getting married in 3 months. She was radiant with love and hope and plans for the future. How could I poison that joy with my darkness? Just some complications they need to investigate, I said, turning away to busy myself with making coffee. Nothing for you to worry about. Work became impossible to maintain. I'd call in sick, then spend the day lying on my bathroom floor, too weak to move. My supervisor at the Christian relief organization where I worked grew increasingly impatient with my absences. Esther, I understand you're dealing with health issues, she said during one awkward phone conversation. But we have deadlines to meet. If you can't fulfill your responsibilities, we need to discuss alternatives. Alternatives. The word stung because I knew what it meant. They were already planning to replace me, already writing me off as unreliable. The ministry work I'd poured my life into was moving on without me. I hung up and laughed bitterly at the irony. I was losing my hair, my strength, my boyfriend, and now my job. All I had left was my faith, and that felt as fragile as tissue paper. That evening, Miriam called with news about her wedding preparations. She chattered excitedly about flowers and dresses and honeymoon plans, and I tried to sound enthusiastic while calculating whether I'd live to see her wedding day. I need to ask you something, she said suddenly, her tone shifting. Will you be my maid of honor? The question hit me like a physical blow. Maid of honor, standing beside her in front of everyone we knew, pretending to be healthy, pretending to have a future. Of course, I heard myself say, I'd be honored. Another lie, another performance. How many more would I have to give before this was over? After we hung up, I sat in my darkened living room and tried to pray, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, questions multiplied like cancer cells in my mind. Why wasn't God healing me? I'd seen Him heal others. Dramatic testimonies of tumors disappearing, impossible recoveries. Why wasn't my faith enough? Why wasn't my service sufficient? What sin was I being punished for? I'd heard the whispers at church about illness being related to sin, about faith being the key to healing. If that was true, what did my diagnosis say about my relationship with God? 2 months into treatment, I collapsed in the grocery store. One moment, I was reaching for bread. The next, I was on the cold linoleum floor, with concerned faces staring down at me. The paramedics were gentle but efficient, and soon I was back in the familiar sterility of the hospital. Dr. Mansouri's expression was grim as he reviewed my latest scans. The cancer isn't responding as well as we'd hoped, he said carefully. We need to adjust your treatment protocol. More chemotherapy, stronger drugs, worse side effects. I nodded mechanically, while inside I felt myself fragmenting. That evening, alone in my hospital room, I faced the truth I'd been avoiding. I was losing this battle. The treatments were buying time, but they weren't buying much of it. I never felt so abandoned, so utterly alone. Where was the God who promised to never leave me? Where was the peace that surpasseth understanding? Where was the hope that was supposed to anchor my soul? The night nurse was a kind woman named Kathy, who moved with quiet efficiency. As she checked my vitals, she noticed my tear-stained face. Rough day? She asked gently. I nodded, not trusting my voice. Would you like me to call someone? Family? Friends? I shook my head. How could I explain that I'd pushed away everyone who might comfort me? That I was dying alone because I'd been too proud to let anyone see me weak? Kathy finished her tasks, but lingered by my bedside. You know, she said softly, I've been working in oncology for 15 years. I've seen people face this journey with every kind of attitude imaginable. The ones who do best aren't necessarily the ones with the strongest faith or the most positive attitude. They're the ones who learn to accept help. I don't know how to do that, I whispered. It starts with telling the truth, she said. To yourself, to the people who love you, to God. Truth is the only foundation strong enough to build hope on. After she left, I stared at the ceiling and considered her words. Truth? I'd been so busy maintaining appearances, protecting others from my reality, that I'd forgotten what truth even looked like. The truth was I was dying. The truth was I was terrified. The truth was I felt abandoned by the God I'd served faithfully. The truth was I had pushed away the man I loved because I was ashamed of being weak. The truth was I had no idea if my faith was real or just performance. For the first time in months, I prayed with complete honesty. Not the polite prayers I'd been offering, not the spiritual-sounding requests for healing, but raw truth. God, I whispered into the darkness, I don't understand what you're doing. I don't feel your presence. I don't even know if you're listening. But I'm dying and I'm scared, and I don't know how to do this. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was waiting, listening. And somewhere in that silence, I heard, not with my ears, but with something deeper, a voice I'd been too busy to notice before. I know, not I'll fix this, or have faith, or any of the spiritual platitudes I'd expected. Just acknowledgement, just presence. I know, for the first time since my diagnosis, I slept peacefully. I woke to find Samir sitting in the chair beside my bed, his eyes red-rimmed and his usually perfect hair disheveled. Our eyes met, and I saw everything I'd been afraid to see. Love, fear, determination, and something that looked like forgiveness. How long have you been here? I asked, my voice raspy from sleep. all night. The hospital called me as your emergency contact. He leaned forward, his hands clasped tightly in his lap. Esther, your sister told me everything. My heart stopped. Everything? The cancer, the prognosis. How long you've been hiding it? His voice broke slightly. How long you've been dying alone because you were trying to protect me? I closed my eyes, unable to bear the pain in his expression. I didn't want you to have to watch me. What? Love you? Care for you? Stand by you when you need me most? He reached for my hand, and I didn't pull away. Do you really think so little of me? Of us? You don't understand, I whispered. This isn't about love, this is about eternity, about faith, about things you don't believe in. Then help me understand. His grip on my hand tightened, because right now, all I know is that the woman I love has been suffering alone, and I wasn't there for her. For the next hour, I told him everything, not just about the cancer, but about my crisis of faith, my questions about God's goodness, my fear of dying without understanding why this was happening to me. He listened without judgment, asking questions I didn't have answers for. I don't know what happens after death, he said finally. I don't know if your God is real or if your prayers matter. But I know you matter. To me, to your family, to the people whose lives you've touched. That has to count for something. His words were beautiful, but they couldn't touch the spiritual void that was consuming me along with the cancer. How could I explain that earthly love, no matter how genuine, couldn't answer eternal questions? Samir, I love you, I said. The words torn from somewhere deep inside me. But I need more than human love right now. I need to know that this suffering has meaning, that my life has purpose beyond what I can see. And you can't give me that. His face crumpled, and I saw the exact moment when he understood that love wasn't going to be enough to bridge the gap between us. So where does that leave us? He asked quietly. I don't know. The following weeks brought a parade of visitors as word of my condition spread through our community. Friends from church, colleagues from work, family members who brought food and flowers and well-meaning advice. Everyone had opinions about my treatment, my attitude, my faith. You just need to trust God's plan, said Mrs. Kelly from my Bible study group. Have you considered that this might be spiritual warfare? Suggested Brother Peter, the church's prayer warrior. Sometimes God allows suffering to purify our faith, offered Sister Mary, who had never faced anything more challenging than a burnt casserole. Their words, meant to comfort, felt like stones thrown at my already battered spirit. Was my cancer really God's plan? Was I under spiritual attack because I wasn't praying hard enough? Was my faith so impure that it required this kind of purification? The questions tortured me more than the chemotherapy. It was during one of these visits that I first noticed her. While Mrs. Kelly was lecturing me about the power of positive thinking, I saw a woman in the hospital corridor who moved differently than everyone else. She wasn't hurried like the doctors or efficient like the nurses. She walked with a kind of peace that seemed to emanate from her very being. Our eyes met through the doorway, and she smiled. Not the sympathetic grimace I'd grown accustomed to, but something genuine and warm. Something that reached past my defenses and touched a place I'd forgotten existed. After my visitors left, she appeared in my doorway. May I come in? She asked. Her accent was American, but her manner suggested someone who had lived in many places. I nodded, curious despite my exhaustion. I'm Rachel, she said, settling into the chair beside my bed. I volunteer here, visiting patients who might need someone to talk to. I have plenty of people to talk to, I said automatically. Do you? She tilted her head, studying my face. Because you look like someone who's been talking, but not being heard. The observation was so accurate, it took my breath away. How could a stranger see what my closest friends had missed? What makes you think that? I asked. Because I've been where you are. Not the cancer, she clarified quickly. But the place where everything you thought you knew about God gets turned upside down. the place where all the Sunday school answers stop working. I stared at her, unsure whether to be offended or relieved that someone had finally named what I was experiencing. I've been a Christian my whole life, I said defensively. I know God. I've served Him faithfully. I'm sure you have, Rachel said gently. But knowing about God and knowing God are two different things. Sometimes it takes being broken to learn the difference. Her words hit like a lightning bolt, illuminating corners of my heart I'd kept carefully hidden. Had I really known God, or had I just known how to be a good Christian? How do you know the difference? I whispered. When you stop trying to earn His love and start learning to receive it, she said. When you realize that your worst moments aren't evidence of His absence, but opportunities for His presence. I wanted to argue, to defend my faith, to insist that I understood grace perfectly well. But the words died in my throat because deep down I knew she was right. I'd spent my entire life trying to be good enough for God, and now that I was dying, I was terrified I'd failed. I don't know how to do that, I admitted. Neither did I, Rachel smiled. But Jesus does, and He's been waiting for you to stop performing long enough to let Him love you. That night, alone in my hospital room, I faced the truth that had been hiding behind all my religious activity. I'd been a Christian my entire life, but I'd never really met Jesus. I'd served God, but I'd never let Him serve me. I tried to earn His love instead of receiving it as a gift. The realization was devastating and liberating at the same time. I thought about Rachel's words, about the difference between knowing about God and knowing God personally. All my life, I'd approached faith like a contract. I would be good, and God would bless me. When the cancer came, the contract felt broken, and I'd felt abandoned. But what if God had never seen our relationship as a contract? What if He'd always seen it as a covenant, unbreakable and unconditional? Jesus, I whispered into the darkness, using His name as the beginning of a conversation. I don't know how to do this. I don't know how to stop performing and start receiving. I don't know how to trust You when everything is falling apart. The silence that followed was different this time, not empty, but full, pregnant with possibility. And then, as clear as if someone had spoken aloud, I heard words that changed everything. You don't have to know how. You just have to let me. The peace that flooded through me was unlike anything I'd ever experienced. Not the absence of fear, but the presence of love itself. Not the promise that everything would be okay, but the assurance that I was not alone. For the first time since my diagnosis, I felt truly alive.